Sure.
Okay, it's Alexander Lawrence from the Portable Infinite, and we do a lot of stuff. I mean, what we're talking about this subject because we kind of sometimes dip into the San Francisco culture, which San Francisco culture kind of has its own kind of history sometimes, and so we're talking one of our books. I had a list of the best books of 2024, and this book was one of the top 20 25 books. And because I wanted to, I mostly like nonfiction, but I there was a couple poetry and a couple fiction books. So we're talking to Doug Broad, Born with a Tale. It's a book about Anton LaVey. Yeah, it says the full title is Born with a Tale, The Devilish Life and Wicked Times of Anton Szandor LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan, a provocative, irreverent biography. And yeah, I mean, I lived because I lived in San Francisco. I grew up in San Francisco, and LaVey was there pretty much the whole time. And I just I just watched a movie about Carol Doda. She's like another one that's like really specific to San Francisco, and his house was a few miles from where I lived. And I met a lot of the some of the journalists that are mentioned in the book. I knew quite a bit of them, so it seemed all familiar territory to me. So here's Doug Broad. Hello, Doug Broad. Your first time talking to each other here. When
Well,
when
hello, and thanks for having me.
when did you when were you at Spin? Did you know Eurydice and William Volman, or you were later on
That
Spin?
was much later. I was at Spin in the early 2000s, 2003 to 2011-ish.
Oh, okay. So yeah, when it kind of went when they had the court case and then it kind of went online, that's when you were doing it.
Well, no, it was we had a real magazine
Oh,
for a number of years. Yeah, the court case was kind of preceded my tenure there. So
oh,
yeah.
okay. And okay, so you have books about music and the Anton LaVey book. What so why did you I guess I asked the question with a lot of people, why did you write this book out of anything you could have written? Why did you write this book?
That's a good question. So yeah, so my first book was a book about 70s hard rock. It's called They Just Seem a Little Weird. And it was kind of a project that I was really devoted to, and I wrote about a lot of bands that I love. But for my next book, I wanted to sort of do something different and explore a personality who I was fascinated by, Anton LaVey, someone who I'd known about for a while. I knew of him. I never met him. I read a lot about him, and I just thought he was a fascinating uh, subject to tackle. There'd been a couple of books written about him previously, a couple of biographies, one of which was kind of semi autobiography because it was written by his longtime companion, and he had obviously a really big input into that book. But no one really took a journalistic approach to sort of charting his life. So I've been a journalist and an editor for my entire career, and I thought that would be it'd be an interesting deep dive to just really look at this guy from all sides, and you know not be beholden to the Church of Satan members and paint this rosy picture of this very eccentric character. And I wanted to sort of show all the sides of this man. So and my whole thing is if I'm going to devote nearly 2 years of my life on a project, it's got to be on something that I'm not going to be bored by. That's going to fascinate me, and I have to say, researching and writing this book, I was constantly fascinated by you what was coming up.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and he comes in and out of San Francisco history and like off and on, and like he wasn't really part of the hippie thing. He was a kind of an anti-hippie. He was kind of not really part of that. He kind of did like lounge music. I met I met Genesis P. Origin. He said he went over to his house and he played the organ and he thought it was horrible. And so that's how you entertain. So and so like I mean he's kind of separate from like the Church of Satan of nowadays, which is like based, I think it's probably in New Orleans or somewhere. Or those people are Texas or something. He his version of Satanism was kind of, it wasn't religious. It was almost like a Buddhist version of Satanism. It was like a kind of a getting rid of beliefs and stuff. Get rid of the
Well,
religion.
it was very, yeah, it started off as kind of an atheistic religion, and it still is really like the God is you are your own God, and it's all about how it's a sort of a self-empowering philosophy. It's like it's very libertarian. It's like you do what you want to do as long as you're hurting nobody else. And his whole idea at the beginning was using Satan as this metaphor or representing the beast was to indulge yourself and to sort of bring out the beast in man and really play up your carnal side.
Yeah, well, he did. There was a association with the Free Love group. They used to have like a space on Divisadero somewhere. You mentioned it in the book because I lived on that block, but there was, this is like
Mm.
back in the '60s. He had some kind. He did some rituals there and on Divisadero. So, I mean, later there was a John Coltrane church was there for a while, and stuff on that same block and stuff. Well,
Mm.
what was the Free Love group there in the '60s that he was sort of a,
Oh, it was the sexual freedom. I'm sorry, it was a sexual freedom league, and it was kind of a free love organization that had lectures, and he came in and lectured about sex and Satanism. There was always this idea that the Church of Satan was full of naked women and orgies, and at some points it was filled with naked women, and he played that up a lot. He actually posed in sort of third string men's magazines with all these naked women around him, in his ritual altar and in his chamber, while he was dressed in his cape and his Satanist finery. But yeah, so he wasn't. You're right. He wasn't really of hippies, but it all came. It was very much involved in the whole San Francisco counterculture and bohemianism. He was very much a part of that. But yeah, so he would do these lectures, and he gave a lecture at the Sexual Freedom League meeting, and it went over very well.
and yeah, so yeah, there was the hippie thing, and then I mean, San Francisco was kind of like the kind of the petri dish for a lot of like kind of thoughts. There was the Satan, his Satan's church. They had a little newsletter. I mean, Jim Jones, the People's Temple wasn't very far away there on
Hmm.
Geary. I mean, did S start in San Francisco too? Was that?
Yeah, that was in San Francisco. There were a lot of different kind of like cults and organizations, blossoming in San Francisco at the time. Um, yeah, there were a lot. There was also the Process Church of the Final Judgment, which was a much more sort of apocalyptic cult. But there was a little bit of crossover with the Church of Satan because they all were happening at the same time. And in fact, I interviewed a doctor who worked at the who started the free clinic in Haight Ashbury, and he told me that he would be treating people from the Church of Satan for venereal diseases and for drugs, and he would be treating people from Manson's family. The Manson family was happening around the same time as well. So he said we got all types at the clinic.
Yeah, yeah. Manson's kind of started in San Francisco before they moved to L.A. and
Hmm.
and a lot of the hippies eventually a lot of them moved up to Marin and started like kind of like Bible cults or or just like free love cults. up
Hmm.
in Marin in Northern California and stuff. And that was like a once the hippie thing kind of petered out by 1970, they kind of decided, okay, well, let's just get like 20 people and go move a piece of land or something. So, well, let's talk about his philosophy again. Like, I mean, he seemed like he had read Ayn Rand. There was there was Freud, there was Nietzsche. I mean, there was, I mean, just the whole, I mean, astrology. I think I read a book. It might have been your book. There was no astrology books pre 1950. All of a sudden in the 60s, there's like 800 astrology books all of a sudden. Like people were more like this obsession with astrology and what's your sign. I mean, that came from somewhere and then kind of expanded in the 60s, and that kind of seemed part of the new age kind of movement of the same time.
So he got, the Church of Satan came at a very sort of significant time in the culture because, you know, there was a lot of thought about about the occult, about ghosts, about the paranormal, about astrology. And it kind of hit that sweet spot with the Church of Satan because, like, when Church of Satan happened, um, like you said, uh, books started coming out like all the time. In the 60s, there would be, hundreds and hundreds of books about these subjects, and they were all popular books. It wasn't, they weren't these arcane, academic tomes. These are like, Chariots of the Gods and ancient astronauts and all these mystical books by like people like Carlos Castaneda, and there were a lot of these new, like, all they were all kind of wrapped up in kind of this new ageism that was happening as well. So it's like it was like a very fertile time for something like the Church of Satan to come along and to sort of become popular and become noteworthy.
Well, yeah, I mean, I kind of think, I mean, I would see it as, I think Christianity pretty much had a lot of control, and then by the time Time Magazine's doing like the "Is God Dead" kind of thing by around 1970, it's probably they were probably behind the times. It's probably at that time people were probably moving on to other things. It's like, like there was less believers, like the whole. I mean, I grew up Catholic, but I kind of felt, you know, I grew up in a real secular kind of world and stuff, in a way that, but where other people like seem like they're, religion was like the only thing, the only game in town, like Christianity, religion, I mean. And but I feel like there were, like post 65, post 70, with the pill and feminism and civil rights and a lot of revolutions. I mean, it seemed like the one thing people were kind of moving away from kind of the one religion thing, and I guess maybe that's what we're still like feeling the effects of that today. Where people want to get back to that pre 65 moment.
Yeah, there were a lot of people at that time. I mean, a lot of young people in particular who were just looking for different spiritual paths. And, LaVey offered something that, not too many young people were into. A lot of his church were older, actually, or older and more conservative. But he did offer them something, and they were seeking something. So yeah, it's interesting how that played out, where the hippies didn't really flock toward him, but it was the sort of the straighter, more conservative people who wanted to basically let it all hang out in their own way. They were involved in the Church of Satan. They were the initial members.
So I mean, you wonder like how did he finance all this stuff? I mean, I guess the Satanic Bible was kind of a hit, made some money. I mean, he had a newsletter. Can you talk a little bit about his
Yeah, so
financial?
I mean, he didn't really finance much. The way it happened was that he was a very shrewd self promoter, and he was able to parlay what I call sort of these promo stunts or happenings like the first satanic wedding which he ministered, and the first satanic funeral and the first satanic baptism of his young daughter. He made these into sort of, publicity stunts, and they were intentionally, by his own admission, supposed to be publicity stunts to get the church in the paper and to get the church on television. And they were very successful in spreading the gospel. But he made his money, through people, joining up, membership dues. But also he would have, and this is fascinating to me, he would actually have in his house, he would have lectures, a lecture series, where he'd talk about, you know, subjects like cannibalism and monsters and fairy tales and, you know, uh, ancient prophecy and just like wild subjects. And he would charge people like, 250 a head or something to sit in his, living room essentially on bridge chairs and get these lectures. So he did make some money that way as well. And he also had some, wealthy patrons within the organization who also, gave him some money. So I mean, he's always admitted. I mean, it's on the one hand, he kind of puffed himself up by saying, I had a fleet of yachts at my disposal and I've had homes in many different places. But at the same time, he even wrote in one of his books that he's always been bad with money, never really understood how to, deal with money. And he sort of gave off the impression that he had money without really having it. So it never really was a money making opportunity for him. Although, like you said, the Satanic Bible, it's still in print. I mean, he wrote it many years ago. I think it was published in 1969, late 69, early 70, and it's already sold like 1.1 million copies. He's had a couple of other books that came out after that as well. So yeah, so he made do on very little, and he was able to get the word out.
So I think I actually first heard of him because it was like the story that he was played the devil in Rosemary's Baby. So that was never true. That was just some myth making of his own.
Yeah, so that was another element of his personality, that he was a myth maker. I mean, he I like to say he very much tried to embellish his resume, which a lot of people take issue with. I don't have that much of a problem with. I mean, I think for a guy like him who you kind of know is a showman, for him to sort of make some stuff up in his background, it's like I think it's fairly harmless. But yeah, so that's one of the elements, of his background.
What about occultists in general? I mean, he's a little bit different from the usual cast, the usual suspects, Aleister Crowley, Kenneth Anger. I mean, just like your people that were into witchcraft or something. He's not really an occultist at all. What do you think he stands like in the whole satanic
Yeah, that
verse?
you make a good point. I mean, his whole thing was he wasn't a believer. He didn't believe in worshiping the devil. For him, it was all a metaphor, and it was all ritual, and it was all a psychodrama to help people, you know, uh, to help people get rich, to help people um, get the person they desired to desire them back. So he structured these psychodramas as part of the rituals in the church, but it was never, a devil worship cult. And in fact, he said of people who were like that, he called them occultniks, and he was kind of, disdainful of people who took this stuff way too seriously because that wasn't him.
So some of the people you mentioned in the book, I mean, I think the first time I heard that he was still alive in the 90s was because I had some association with the Nose magazine. So I think Jack Bulware put together like a weird San Francisco map and stuff, and it was like one of it was like, oh, Crowley lives in the house over there. I go, oh, that's a real place. I thought the guy,
Hmm.
I didn't know he was still alive. When I moved back to San Francisco in the '90s, it was like I saw this map, and it had like places like 25 hour donuts and Fascination, that place on Market that used to be there, and then the house, Crowley's house, or where Patty Hearst was in the closet, the address and stuff. So
Hmm.
yeah, Jack Bulware, I guess, was part of the kind of the rehabilitation of Crowley, or not Crowley,
LaVey.
of LaVey in the '90s and stuff. What do you think about the whole Bulware angle?
Yeah, I mean, to me that was part of the story that I thought hadn't really been told. The fact that he'd kind of like LaVey had kind of gone underground for a while during the Satanic Panic of the '80s, where the church was being blamed for stuff that they had nothing to do with. So he was kind of quiet and out of the public eye, but in the late '80s and early '90s, there was this kind of surge of interest in him again, and I think it was pretty much led by two strains. There was this thing called The Birth of Tragedy that this guy named Eugene Robinson put out, and he did this long interview with LaVey that was really smart and really kind of fascinating. And that led to other, zines during that period, like rock zines and punk zines, getting more interested in LaVey. And then LaVey did an interview with this book series, Research, and it was a book called Research Modern Primitives. And in
Oh, right.
fact, Genesis Porridge was in that as well.
Yeah.
And LaVey is in that book talking about Satanism and tattooing and all this interesting stuff. And that was really the first time that I sort of did I kind of knew about LaVey vaguely, but then when I saw that in like 1989, that was the first time where I actually became really interested in LaVey. And from there, it just kind of snowballed. A lot of, rock musicians became interested in him. Like I said, a lot more magazines and zines, and even, above ground magazines like Rolling Stone and Washington Post. They started doing stories and profiles on LaVey. So, yeah, so, The Nose, which is what Jack Bower edited, they did a big fashion shoot with LaVey, a very amusing fashion shoot at his house, amongst all his kind of cool and interesting stuff. And that fashion shoot also was very influential in bringing more people, sort of to LaVey.
Yeah, also, I mean, also with V Vale and Research, there was Adam Parfrey, and he did a lot of the apocalypse culture, a lot of the stuff,
Hmm.
and conspiracy theory stuff, which is really popular these days. I mean, I interviewed Adam Parfrey. I mean, he kind of started out moving to San Francisco, and just as far as I know, he would go to like Goodwill. Goodwills used to have those donation boxes.
Hmm.
He would raid them for any kind of weird books or anything, and sell them back to bookstores and stuff. So at some point, as he was, or he just keeps them for himself. At some point, he just discovered LaVey, and I guess he actually wrote about him and published his books. And
Well, no, he actually got the rights to LaVey's second book, which was originally called The Complete Witch, and he retitled it The Satanic Witch, and Parfrey put it out. And that was the beginning of a very fruitful publishing relationship because Parfrey ended up putting out even more writing from LaVey. He did a book called The Devil's Notebook. He did a book called Satan Speaks, and he also published Blanche Barton's biography of LaVey called The Secret Life of a Satanist.
so, yeah, I mean, he did books about, Scientology and the Lords of Chaos, the Swedish
Hmm.
death metal. So it was kind of up his alley. It was already kind of like what he was doing. So there's Boulware, Adam Parfrey, and then at some point some point he's there's Becky Wilson and Greg Turkington. I guess that had to do with the music, the lounge music, the lounge CDs, or how did their that relationship? Or I mean, Becky Wilson was also at the nose, I think, for a bit there too.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Becky was instrumental in setting up the fashion shoot, and she was, she was lovely to speak with, and she was very instrumental in bringing a lot of, you know, rock, like sort of hipper musicians to sort of to LaVey's circle. Like she introduced him to J.G. Thirlwell, who's scraping
Yeah,
feet us off the wheel,
yeah.
and
She introduced me to him, like
oh,
me when I was in New York. My mom, like Fetus, met my mom like in New York like, about 20 years ago. And I was with Becky, thanks to Becky Wilson. Yeah, she's nice.
mhm. Yeah, and Greg Turkington was Becky Wilson's roommate in San Francisco, and she let him know that she was doing this fashion shoot, and Greg was like, "Oh, really?" Because he remembered, LaVey, and he was fascinated by LaVey. So Becky said, and at that point, Greg was putting out records, like independent records, San Francisco bands, and she said, you should meet him, maybe put out some of his music. And he did. He met LaVey. LaVey liked him, and Greg was really into that kind of music. So sort of, LaVey was a big keyboard fanatic, and he loved playing like the old sort of crooner standards from like the 20s and like very odd, obscure old music. And it was what Greg was into as well, and they had a very successful relationship, as Greg put out his records.
Yeah, he also did the prank phone call record. That's all. I think that's how I met Becky originally. Was she gave me the Chinese pizza or whatever, the prank prank phone call, or let's start a band stuff. I guess you can't do prank phone calls anymore because it's like your name comes up or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's difficult nowadays.
What about this character Harvey Bennett Stafford? I mean, I went to a couple of his art openings, and I actually hung a show for him, and he used to be kind of a figure in the Mission, and I know he was kind of new the Melvins, and I saw the Melvins at his house, and he was kind of like the San Francisco version of Francis Bacon or something. But I heard he was over there when LaVey died. He was over there trying to get any papers or anything because he was also a book collector and just and
Yeah, and this is interesting. So yeah, Harvey Stafford was another friend of LaVey's who met him through Boyd Rice, who was also in that circle. And Harvey once with Boyd painted the house. The house was in disrepair and needed a paint job, so he volunteered to paint it with Boyd, and he became very friendly with LaVey. LaVey liked the fact that this guy, helped him out and didn't ask for anything. And Harvey was fascinated by him, and he was, and Harvey was like, he's a real artist, and he was telling me how important it was for a person like LaVey, this kind of older, more curmudgeonly guy who actually had an attitude and had a personality and had like theories, and he said he was important to have a person like this around, and he was very happy to be his friend. And when uh after LaVey died, and the house that he owned in San Francisco was not really at that point was no longer owned by him. It was taken over, and his longtime companion Blanche and his son had to abandon the house. They had to move. They were forced to move, and there was a lot of. I mean, you could read this in the book, but there was a lot of back and forth between LaVey's daughters and Blanche. There was a lot of animosity, and toward the end, people were just taking stuff out of the house and putting it in storage. And at one point, Harvey was over there helping move some stuff, and he saw these boxes um, that had, paperwork and just like the history and the archives of the Church of Satan. And he was able to get some of these, and they actually now ended up and they reside a research library in Albany, in Albany, California, which is a few miles north of San Francisco, near Berkeley. And there's a research library called the Aerosmith Library that a guy named Don Frew runs, and Don was also a friend of LaVey's. And all these people are tied in, and I didn't
Yeah.
know they were tied in until I started doing the research. Um, and in fact, when I did a reading in San Francisco in October, and Jack Boulware interviewed me for the reading, during the reading, it was in a bar, and Don, who runs this library, showed up with his wife, and Harvey showed up, and they made the connection that it was Harvey who had gotten the papers that ended up residing in the research library. So it's just a small world, and it
Yeah.
was kind of a fun connection to make.
Yeah, San Francisco. Yeah, I mean, I lived there for years, and yeah, you end up. I mean, because it's like, I mean, back when I lived there, there was like less than 1 million people. So anybody that's a writer or artist, it's a very, it gets smaller and smaller, and you end up meeting everybody that's kind of
Hmm.
sharing your passions and stuff. Well, we're kind of running out of time here. So if someone wants to get the book, I mean, I definitely recommend this book. It was on my top books of last year.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Born with a Tail, and this is if they want to get the book, they should go to the independent bookstore and demand go where
You know what? Go in an indie store and demand it, or to be honest with you, go on Amazon because it seems like Amazon is, as much as I hate
yeah.
to really, push it. Um, People aren't finding the book in some stores, so for convenience sake, it might just be better to go to Amazon. But you can find it, I'm sure, if you look hard enough.
And if people want to follow you, should they go to Instagram or Facebook or something?
Instagram or Facebook. I'm at Doug Broad on Facebook, and Doug. Well, I'm also Doug.Broad on X, and I'm not a big fan of X, but I'm on that.
Okay, well, we'll put a few links in this interview so people can find you and ask some further questions and
Yeah, I'm happy to converse with people and exchange. I love this.
because there's probably some more LaVey. I mean, I just the book kind of popped on the radar. I go, oh, there's a book about LaVey. That's interesting, and I looked it up, and I go, okay, and it turned out to be one of the best books I think to check out. I mean, it was definitely coming from a different place and very unexpected. So that's always been the best.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Good to
Okay.
hear.
Okay, well, let me let's see. Do you stop or